Long before the story became sweetened for children, Hansel and Gretel existed as a grim reflection of hunger, fear, and abandonment, in a world where survival often demanded cruelty. Their tale begins not in magic, but in desperation. A poor woodcutter lived on the edge of a vast forest with his two children, Hansel and Gretel. After their mother had died, the loss hollowed the home, and soon after, a new woman entered their lives. She was not born evil, but famine and fear hardened her heart. Food grew scarce, winters grew longer, and each night the sound of the children's hunger felt like an accusation she could no longer bear. The woodcutter loved his children deeply, yet he was weak in spirit. He watched them grow thinner as the bread loaf shrank day by day. His wife whispered terrible ideas into his ear at night, telling him that if the children stayed, all four of them would die. Better, she argued, to abandon them in the forest, where perhaps God or fate would decide their end. The man cried and protested, but fear won over love. Hansel, pretending to sleep, heard every word. Though only a child, he understood that the world was no longer safe. That night, Hansel slipped outside and gathered small white stones under the moonlight, hiding them in his pocket. The next morning, the family walked deep into the forest under the pretense of gathering wood. The trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, and the silence heavier. When the parents left the children alone and disappeared, Gretel began to cry, but Hansel comforted her, dropping stones as they walked. By nightfall, the moon rose, illuminating the path of white pebbles that led them home. The father wept with joy when he saw them return, but the stepmother's face hardened. Hunger had not disappeared, and neither had her resolve. Soon after, famine worsened. This time, Hansel had no chance to gather stones. All he could carry were crumbs of bread, which he scattered as they walked even deeper into the forest than before. When the parents vanished again, the forest felt endless. Birds descended and ate the crumbs, erasing the path back. Night fell cold and merciless. The children wandered for days, growing weaker, their feet blistered, their hope thinning like smoke. At last, through the trees, they saw something impossible. A small house made of bread, cakes, and sugar. Hunger overpowered caution. They broke pieces from the walls and roof, eating greedily. For the first time in days, warmth spread through their bodies, but the sweetness was a trap. An old woman appeared, smiling gently, her voice soft and comforting. She invited them inside, offering milk and pancakes, clean beds, and kindness. Exhausted and naive, the children followed her. The woman was no harmless grandmother. She was a cannibal who preyed on lost children, fattening them before killing and eating them. The moment the door shut, kindness vanished. Hansel was locked in a cage like an animal, forced to eat constantly while the witch checked his finger each day to see if he had grown fat enough to slaughter. Cleverly, Hansel offered a small bone instead of his finger, and the witch, nearly blind, was deceived. Gretel was forced into slavery, cooking, cleaning, and watching her brother waste away behind iron bars. Days turned into weeks. Hansel's spirit weakened, though his mind remained sharp. Gretel's hands burned from labor, her heart heavy with guilt and fear. The witch grew impatient, enraged by Hansel's continued thinness. At last, she decided to cook him regardless. She ordered Gretel to prepare the oven, intending to kill both children once Hansel was gone. Standing before the roaring fire, Gretel realized that obedience meant death. Trembling, she pretended not to understand how to check if the oven was hot enough. Furious, the witch leaned inside to demonstrate. In a moment of desperate courage, Gretel shoved her forward and slammed the door shut. The witch screamed as flames consumed her. Gretel stood frozen, not in triumph, but in shock. Survival had demanded murder, and innocence was lost forever in that instant. Gretel freed Hansel, and together they searched the house. They found chests filled with jewels, gold, and the remains of other children who had not been as lucky. The wealth felt heavy in their hands, stained by suffering. Still, they took it, knowing it was their only hope. They fled into the forest, guided at last by a white bird that led them toward familiar land. When they reached home, they learned their stepmother had died during their absence. The father, broken by guilt and grief, collapsed when he saw them alive. The gold saved them from starvation, but it could not erase the scars. Hansel woke screaming from dreams of cages and fire. Gretel carried the memory of the witch's screams in her silence. Childhood had ended not with age, but with hunger and fear. The story does not end in joy, but in survival. Hansel and Gretel lived on, but they were no longer the children who had once followed their parents into the forest. They had learned that love could fail, that adults could betray, and that the world could force terrible choices upon the innocent. Their tale endured because it spoke a truth too dark to forget. In desperate times, cruelty grows easily, and survival often demands a price no child should ever have to pay.